I stepped into Neve, into yeshiva, and heard so many statements about, like, Judaism says this about women and Judaism says that, and they were said with such certainty that they didn't really leave any room for questioning. And yet every once in a while I would hear a kind of like different idea that would pop up, and then it would just disappear, one here, one there, but I never saw them woven together into a framework unto themselves. And it was then during the course of my learning that I came upon, actually learning about Purim, that I came upon this teaching of the Ari, where he called the Miyut HaYareach, where he presents this model of the 7 stages of feminine development that he says is the universal pattern of the feminine life cycle in every form, like woman in relation to man, the inner feminine, or really all of creation is feminine in relation to Hashem. And that journey moves from diminishment into fullness of stature. And the last stage, which is the messianic stage, that when we all say Mashiach now, like, what are we really talking about? So he says that we're talking about a stage that is the complete tikkun of the masculine and feminine, where they meet panim b'panim, shaveh legamre, face to face and completely equal. And I was like, whoa, this is the Ari. It sounds like a feminist treatise, like, whoa. And so that really then inspired me to look more deeply into what he was saying and to try to understand how his ideas applied to real life, to people's lives, to women's lives, to women and men's lives, and also to just understand how those ideas then are unpacked in later generations and other rabbinic writings. So that was how the whole journey began. And I've taught the material to classes. That's where it really gets enriched, where when I'm teaching in a class and people are sharing their personal experiences and how it relates or doesn't relate and what's missing, and it kind of forces an unpacking of the material even still more. So I do feel that it holds, it's a real light in terms of understanding who we are, where we are now, why things were the way they were, and how that was right for those stages. And just like a child goes through various developmental stages, and each stage, it's like something happens there that's critical, like a certain growth and a certain consciousness that's acquired. So just like they teach that if a child walks before it crawls, that there's certain wiring that doesn't happen in the system, and that they're debilitated later in life. So also the earlier stages where there's greater disparity between the feminine is more diminished, those aren't mistakes or errors or imperfections. There is something that is happening to he and she in that process that makes it possible for her to come into her fullness of stature, and somehow for it to work, for the union to deepen and all that. So it helped. I just want to say one thing, that it helped me to not only feel like hopeful and a vision of what is going to be, what's promised to be, and where we're headed. But it also helped me to feel more at peace with what was and what had been, and to feel the purposefulness of that is also part of the design. So really, I mean, each one of these 7 stages, when you unpack them, you can kind of get a sense of how, that is how it was at different stages of history or whatever. And it seems like that we now are in more or less around stage 4, where the feminine is coming into what's called her mochin, her intellectual maturity. And, I know that in my parents' days, it was more like kind of intellect was more the masculine, abstract intellect at least, was more the masculine realm. And the feminine was more like kind of took care of all the emotional kind of happenings and social, issues in the home. And now there is an idea that at this stage the feminine is coming into her intellectual maturity, and so there is more of a meeting of minds as well as of hearts between masculine and feminine in these days. And so, but again, even though when the feminine comes into her intellectual maturity, it's not that she thinks like him. She brings her kind of feminine sensibilities into that. And so I know, like, even like I've a number of friends of mine who are lawyers who kind of came into the trade when the world opened up to kind of women in more advanced professions, and they say that women's approach to law is actually by and large quite different from men's, and that they're contributing something that is important, and in some ways they're even more effective than men are in approaching certain issues of law. So I think that it applies on a professional level in terms of women as they come into their intellectual maturity, kind of participating more freely in those kinds of those aspects of life and the world. But I think that it also is a deepening of intimacy between a couple, even within a couple of a he and a she, that more of them is overlapping now, and more of each is able to be. I always say that really relationship, the zivug, the union of relationship, is essentially happens on the level of da'at, of knowing. Like it says, and Adam knew Chava, Eve, and they were as one flesh. So really the union is really a seeing and being seen, knowing and being known. And so as the feminine comes into her intellectual maturity, so there's a whole other increment of meeting that now can happen between he and her, and a deepening of intimacy and a deepening of seeing and being seen. So I think that that stage of feminine development, it makes a difference on the socio-cultural level, but it also makes a difference on just the deepening of intimacy within a couple.